Whilst you're all shut in, what better opportunity is there than to allow the imagination to wander? Subsequently, we get McCartney 3, the next instalment in his one-man band series, if I may call them that. But how does it compare to McCartney 1 and McCartney 2? Let's find out, shall we? Welcome classic rock fans to an episode of New Album Review, and today we're talking about the new McCartney album, McCartney 3. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe and check that bell so you get notified of any future uploads. And if you're thinking of buying this album, please do so using the Amazon links below, as this channel will receive a small commission at no extra cost to you. In fact, you can buy anything off Amazon using the link below, and the same applies. It's much appreciated. There certainly seems to be a pattern to these releases, as McCartney finds himself twiddling his proverbial thumb, so to speak, with time to kill and a creative itch to scratch. The first one, of course, came out after the Beatles had just split. On it we get the plaintive melancholy of Junk and that transcendent, triumphant Maybe I'm Amazed. In retrospect, I think it's seen as a great album. It's certainly seen as a great album by me, but at the time Melody Maker described it as sheer banality. What I like about these releases is it's music made with no expectations, simply for the joy of making music, and perhaps as a distraction from all the stuff that had preceded it. In fact, the music critic Kitty Empire writes of the first album, "It was conceived as the Beatles are fractiously imploding. It is very much the work of a cultural powerhouse in a tailspin, resetting his dials on a Scottish farm with his young family." I must admit I was never a fan of McCartney 2, an album made while Wings were coming to an end. The poppy electronic dalliances on this one are a real turn-off. In fact, the music press as well also didn't like it, describing it as electronic junk. Perhaps these albums can only ever be appreciated retrospectively. I have to say that this album, McCartney 3, is much closer in spirit to the first McCartney album. And the use of vintage equipment like that double bass and what definitely sounds like a mellotron to me, or maybe it's a synth sounding like a mellotron. And of course that famous Hofner bass he uses all adds to the tones and textures of this record. And of course in the tradition of these releases he plays all the instruments himself. The whole thing feels refreshingly honest and authentic. The songs on here are finely crafted, melodic and effortless, I must add. They certainly embody that spirit of adventure and experimentation. This album applies some soothing balm to the burn that was this year in lockdown. This album's been described by Neil McCormick, writing The Telegraph, as occasionally cheesy set of light-hearted pop ideas. I love some of the imagery employed on this album. There's a wonderful line, I think it's in the track Sliding. I know there must be other ways of feeling free, but this is what I want to do, who I want to be. And it's that concept of flight and birds that it establishes itself as a motif on this record. It becomes an extended metaphor of all its connotations of freedom and unrestraint. The opening track, of course, Long-Tailed Winterbirds, allows the listener to soar and drift on these firmaments of sounds and vibes that comes from this album. Then we get the reprise, which is Winterbird, which is just beautiful. We're led to believe that the Winterbird is in fact Paul, with the references to the seasons being a metaphor for the different stages in life. Alexis Petridis, writing The Guardian, has described this as a nod to the bucolic atmosphere of 1971's Ram, and I'm certainly in favour of that. And the first track on the album is Long-Tailed Winterbird, which is immediately one of my favourites. It's a delightful acoustic piece, largely instrumental, I have to say. It employs a symbolism and fantasy that takes the listener on quite an interesting journey. The guitar tones on this track are absolutely sublime. They certainly create some very eerie and strange textures. They seem to take precedence over the percussion as well, which at one point seems to kind of fade out to re-emphasise the tonal qualities of the instruments. It really is a remarkable listen. In fact, I think it's fair to say that the whole number has a floaty, hypnotic quality. Lavatory Lil is an interesting one, if only by the title. If anything, it's a song that says that clearly states that revenge is a dish best served cold. It's certainly not my favourite on the record. I mean, it's been described by The Guardian as a self-indulgent lapse of judgment. I must admit it conjured up all sorts of nasty images when I read the title. It's certainly no relation to Lovely Rita, perhaps more Polyphene Pam. It has a bluesy strum to it. It's a song essentially about a gold digger. Gosh, I wonder who he could be singing about. Sliding is a great number with a cavernous riff to it. It's certainly a muscular number, a blues rock dirge. It's a real hodgepodge of grungy bass, pronounced guitars, and the rhythm section has some real intent behind it. You certainly get the impression on this one that Paul McCartney is really enjoying himself, and that's the raison d'etre, the whole point of this exercise. I think it's to get stuff out of the basement, as Rocky would say. And his voice on this one is neatly reverbed, which suits the spirit of the song, but also we have to wonder whether or not it's covering up a multitude of sins as well. Deep, Deep Feelings are a long number, perhaps too long perhaps. But the one thing, there's a fascinating interplay between the different textures evoked by the quite interesting use of instrumentation. The music just swells and soars on this one. And I must admit, I love the layered use of strings on this. It all adds to the kind of tapestry of sound which very much defines this number. And of course it's on this one uses the mellotron, or at least mellotronic sounding synth flourishes. I'm not sure mellotronic is an adjective, it is now I suppose. But this noodling certainly gives the song a retro feel that has us reaching back down amnesia lane for a stroll through strawberry fields. The whole thing unfolds beautifully, I must say, and I love the instrumental passages, the tempo shifts. It allows the listener to just luxuriate in the whole thing. It's an intriguing collage of voices and definitely a strange meditation on love. The Kiss of Venus is a romantic acoustic number, and McCartney's no stranger to those, but this has a delicacy and intimacy in its phrasing that reminds us of Junk, perhaps even Yesterday. Certainly no anxiety of influence there then. But instead of mourning the absence of love on this one, instead he sings about that early morning glow bestowed by the kiss of Venus. It's overall a lovely number. Seize the Day sees McCartney referencing Horace, or perhaps Avenged Sevenfold. It's an interesting track that explores the way we interact with one another and the need to be a decent human being whilst taking advantage of every opportunity that life offers. I love the lines in this song. When the cold days come and the old days fade away, there'll be no more sun, and we'll wish that we'd held on to that day. Interesting sound to this one. It has a kind of a Brian May vibe going on with the sound of the guitars. It just adds to the overall splendour of this track. At one point, McCartney sounds a little bit defensive as he sings "It's All Right to Be Nice," but according to The Guardian, it's a sentiment that gains heft in a world of snarling binary divisions. Find My Way is another interesting one with an interesting guitar sound, very much about staying true and focused. I mean, he sings, I can find my way, I know my left from my right, I know my way around, I walk towards the light. I think Find My Way is one of those songs that offers some comfort after the trials of 2020. And it has to be said, it reminds me a little bit of Drive My Car. Subsequent listens reveal a lot more going on in this track than its initial run through. I mean, the lyrics are beautifully accompanied by the ascending and descending tones of the instruments, and that appreciated texture lends a gorgeous platform for these lyrics. And I have to say, it's a track that recalls the whimsy of some of McCartney's more celebrated pieces. Women and Wives is an interesting one. I mean, we kind of feel the admonishing wag of McCartney's finger here. He tells us, "Hear me, women and wives, hear me, husbands and lovers. What we do with our lives seems to matter to others." I think the central message to this one is just to be fair and decent in our interaction with one another. McCartney makes a plea for greater understanding and compassion, and what's interesting is the optimism and hopefulness of the number is juxtaposed interestingly with a sense of plaintive nostalgia evoked by the piano on this one. Pretty Boys is an oblique meditation on fame and life in the public gaze. It's a fascinating track which, if you delve deeper, it's very much about the psychology of being constantly observed. One critic has pointed out that photography is uppermost in McCartney's mind as one of the most snapped humans on the planet, and as a man once married to a photographer, he brings nuance to this study. It's a reflection on the Beatles and the vagaries of fame. Try to feel the light, he sings, the light here being as metaphorical as it is literal, emblematic of the spotlight. It's interesting the way he sings. I mean, his voice is, I think, fairly unaffected on this album. It's very much the voice of McCartney at 78, and I respect that. But with this song, I mean, I don't think it's a case of sour grapes. There's certainly no bitterness in it. I mean, Tree may be regarding today's very manufactured boy bands, but I think he's looking back at the teen hysteria that provided the soundtrack to his own rise to fame. Deep Down has an R&B vibe to it. It's a little bit meandering. It feels a little bit like a jam. Again, it employs some interesting instrumentation. I love the organ sound on this one. And finally, we get that Winter Bird When Winter Comes. You know, it starts as a reprise to that gorgeous opening track before switching gear to a a beautifully delicate number to close the album. Every song on this album feels crafted and considered. It's spontaneous yet conversely immaculate in its construction. It has to be said that these numbered solo albums are definitely him dipping his toes into that experimental pool of self-expression. It certainly has that whiff of musical freedom about it. And I have to say, I do like this album more than I like McCartney 2, but it hasn't quite knocked McCartney 1 off its pedestal. I have to say I prefer it to the last album he put out, Egypt Station. It just feels like he's very much making the music he wants to make. And if I may quote Kitty Empire once more, there is definitely a sense of unfettered let it be-ness to it. Anyway, they're my thoughts on the new McCartney album, McCartney 3. I'd love to know what you think of this review and, of course, this album. Please leave your comments down below. So it just leaves me to say I hope you're all well and staying safe, and I do hope you keep listening.